A large part of mankind still feels that it more or less belongs to a religious orientation. Let's just take the commandment, "You shall not kill," which is surely known to everyone and which is generally acknowledged among all nations and all religious orientations. Despite the clear statement that man should not take the life of another being, this commandment is understood very differently in the various cultural circles. Why is this so? Let's explore the question. What did the original teachings of the just mentioned religions say? Is the content still being taught and passed on in the same way today as it originally sounded? Or was it perhaps changed or even falsified over the centuries? Buddha lived in northern India 560 to 480 before Christ. According to legend, he was born as Prince Siddhartha in a noble family. He grew up in luxury, but, as has been passed down, it was pointed out to him that in his previous life on earth he had promised to use his next life to help people, so as to free them from suffering. It's said that one day he recognized his pleasant life up to then as being senseless. At age 29, soon after the birth of his only son, Buddha left his child, his wife, and his homeland, and, searching for redemption, became an ascetic. However, since this did not bring him any closer to his goals, he turned away from the traditional religions of that time and sought his own path, primarily in meditation. He called this the middle path. It is said that he finally found enlightenment under a tree. Buddha taught men and women of all social classes for a total of 45 years. He died at the age of 80. His teachings were first passed on orally by his disciples and only written down about 200 to 300 years after his death. Nonviolence, and thus also consistent abstention from eating meat, that is, vegetarianism, was considered by Buddha to be one of the most important steps on the path to self-recognition. Let's hear several quotes on this topic. They demonstrate how clearly and distinctly he expressed himself on this subject. Eating meat kills the seed of great mercy for all living beings. My love belongs to the creatures. May all created and living beings, may all beings, no matter of which kind, not experience anything through which disaster threatens them. May nothing bad ever happen to them. From something that has been passed down, we learn the following. While collecting alms, Buddha and his followers met a group of children who were wantonly tearing the legs off a crab, and he said, "Every living being deserves to enjoy a feeling of security and well-being. We must protect life and give happiness to others. All living beings, whether large or small, two or four-legged, whether they swim or fly, all have the right to live. We may not injure or even kill other living beings. We must protect life." Buddha predicted the developing falsification of his teachings. He warned of this with the words, "After I pass on, various kinds of spirit beings will appear everywhere that lead people astray by teaching that man may eat meat and can nevertheless attain enlightenment." Buddha pointed out the responsibility that meat-eaters bear for the fact that a living being has to die for them. He explained, The eater or buyer indirectly is to blame for the suffering of the animals, because through his consumption or his demand, he boosts supply. And he also pointed out the many illnesses, which he even listed individually, that could affect people through meat consumption. He also taught that animals are primarily killed for the money that is earned through the sale of the meat. Buddha said that if no one were to eat meat or buy it, no one would kill animals for this purpose. Buddha's explanations about empathy with the creatures of the earth were, however, a thorn in the side of the priests and monks of that time. Right from the beginning, they tried to give Buddha's words a different direction, yes, to change them into their opposite, by claiming that with his teachings, he merely wanted to express that only those are not allowed to eat meat who have no compassion. Anyone who has compassion for God's creatures, as Buddha's teachings mandated, could therefore, in their opinion, indeed eat meat. But in reality, this was the falsification of Buddha's teachings by priests and monks. Despite everything, traces of Buddha's original teachings can still be found, his love for the animals. When, for example, the first Buddhist monks came to Ceylon, the present Sri Lanka, the first thing they did was to abolish the hunting of animals. They taught the hunters and tried to make it clear to them that every creature is given life by the same power, and that one may not murder these, one's brothers and sisters. Hunting is still forbidden in Sri Lanka, and vegetarianism is still widespread there today. In some countries, even today, there are the so-called original Buddhist small communities, which, for instance, as in Thailand, operate vegetarian restaurants or snack bars. They are convinced that at some point a person will have to endure the same torments that he has caused to other living beings. Buddha taught absolute nonviolence toward all living beings. According to his teachings, the commandment, "You shall not kill," therefore also holds true for war. No difference is made here between offensive and defensive war. The following original teaching regarding this has been passed down. One day, soldiers asked Buddha for his opinion concerning whether a warrior who dies a hero's death would go to heaven. After some hesitation, Buddha replied that there was no way that such a warrior would go to heaven, but would land in a certain kind of hell, because at the moment of death, his spirit is in a bad condition. For ultimately he, the warrior, wishes the enemy, that is his fellow man, death. Buddha, however, taught absolute nonviolence toward man, nature, and animals. Approximately 17 million people avow to the Jewish religion. Of these, about 7 million live in the U.S. alone. Doubtlessly, no other people had so many prophets of God in its midst. How does it look in Judaism concerning the teaching of nonviolence and the killing of animals? The Jewish law book, the Torah, clearly taught, "You shall not kill." So reads the fifth commandment of God through Moses. It is reported how God revealed the 10 Commandments to his prophet Moses on Mount Sinai, and Moses engraved these commandments on stone tablets. On these tablets, there was nothing to be read about exceptions to the forbiddance of killing. Through the great prophets of Israel, God always warned against every form of violence and, above all, against the temptation of war. And so he said through Moses, for example, "The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be still. According to this report, the enemy soldiers did not die by the hand of the Israelites, but through a natural disaster. For thus said the Lord God, the only one of Israel, in returning and rest you shall be saved. In quietness and in trust shall be your strength. But on other pages of the 5 books of Moses, death sentences for certain crimes or offenses are determined, as well as instructions for war, which allegedly also come from God. So, is God changeable? That for Judaism God is an unchangeable God is also found in the prophet Malachi, through whom God says, I, the Lord, do not change. And the original commandment, you shall not kill, also came from God, without exception. And how is it regarding animals? Nonviolence regarding animals, that is, a vegetarian diet, is not generally taught in modern Orthodox Judaism as a biblical precept. However, it is undisputed that in the Torah, in the 5 books of Moses, which from ecclesiastical points of view are also a part of the Bible, the original food is described now and in the future Messianic age as vegetarian. So it is stated in the 1st book of Moses, Genesis chapter 1, verse 29, and God said, Behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. The Talmud, one of the most significant writings in Judaism, agrees with this original form of food. There it says, among other things, Adam was not permitted to eat flesh. Another passage from the Talmud that speaks against eating meat reads, The Jew who is not merciful toward everything that God created is not a true Jew. The person who is merciful toward his fellow creatures receives mercy from heaven, but whoever is not merciful toward his fellow creatures cannot count on receiving mercy from above. This last statement indicates the law of cause and effect, which is also called the law of karma in Eastern countries, and which also decisively shapes the Holy Scriptures of Judaism. From Adam until Noah, that is, for 10 generations, according to biblical tradition, the people of Israel lived according to God's commandment, that is, purely vegetarian. But after Noah, God allegedly changed his mind and allowed the eating of meat. Back then, Noah himself is said to have killed and burned many animals, which he had just saved from the deluge with much expense and effort. Isn't that a contradiction? First he rescued the animals, and then he supposedly killed them. With the prophet Isaiah, God warned in terms of the eating of animal flesh. What to me is the multitude of your sacrifices, says the Lord. I have had enough of burnt offerings of rams and the fat of the well-fed beasts. I do not delight in the blood of bulls, or of lambs, or of goats. When you spread out your hands, I will hide my eyes from you. Even though you make many prayers, I will not listen. Your hands are full of blood. The message of the other prophets of God reads exactly the same way. such as in Hosea, Amos, and Jeremiah. God speaks as follows through the prophet Jeremiah. For in the day that I brought them out of the land of Egypt, I did not speak to your fathers or command them concerning burnt offerings and sacrifices. But this command I gave them: Obey my voice, and I will be your God, and you shall be my people. Through the prophet Isaiah, God even equates the murder of animals with the murder of people, and again most strongly condemns burnt offerings. Quote, He who slaughters an ox is like one who kills a man. The commandment, You shall not kill, which the great Jewish prophet of God Moses received on Mount Sinai as revealed by God, was and is still valid, also regarding animals. For exceptions to this commandment were not written on the stone tablets with the 10 Commandments that are venerated in Judaism. And these tablets with the forbiddance of killing and the observance of the commandments engraved on them were considered in Judaism to be a guarantee for the presence of God. Worldwide, about 1.2 billion people have vowed to Islam, which is thus the second largest religion after Christianity. The Muslims are represented through 2 mainstreams, the Shiites and the Sunnites, whereby with 90% the latter are the majority. Islamic rules of faith are based on the Quran, which is considered to be a revelation of the Prophet Muhammad conveyed through the angel Gabriel. It is supplemented by passed-down instructions and actions of Muhammad, known as the Sunnah and Hadi. According to tradition, Muhammad lived in Mecca during the 6th and 7th centuries after Christ, as well as in Medina in Saudi Arabia. What has been passed down about Muhammad's life also contains statements about a non-violence-oriented attitude toward animals and an animal-friendly diet, which say, for instance, that he enjoyed milk diluted with water, yogurt with butter, or nuts and cucumbers with dates. The pomegranate is said to have been his favorite fruit, which he would also subsist on for weeks at a time. In one popular tradition, Muhammad is said to have rebuked his followers for failing to show compassion. But we do show compassion, they responded, to our wives, children, and relatives, but the Prophet insisted, It is not this to which I refer. I am speaking of the universal mercy. And in the 6th surah of the Quran, it reads, There is not an animal that lives on the earth, nor a being that flies on its wings, but forms part of communities like you. Nothing have we omitted from the book, and they all shall be gathered to their Lord in the end. Even though Islam is not considered a religion in which vegetarianism and animal protection are prominent, there are numerous statements and stories that report of a connection between humans and animals. Thus, for instance, on their pilgrimage to Mecca, it is forbidden for the faithful to kill an animal as long as they have not taken off their shroud, the ihram. Independent of this, there are also numerous statements about Muhammad's compassionate relationship to animals. Quote, During the killing, the butcher must look the animal in the eyes, and if he sees tears in the animal's eyes, he should also shed tears. In this way, perhaps he will gain insight and henceforth not want to kill any animals. Several of the most noteworthy quotes on this topic are found in the Hadith, the biographical works about Muhammad. Among others, we find a statement to his son-in-law, which has been passed down as follows. O Ali, abstain from eating meat for 40 days in a row. For if you eat meat for 40 days, your heart will become as hard as a stone, and you will no longer have any compassion. Therefore, desist from eating any kind of meat. According to Hadith tradition, the following account is also worth mentioning. It came to pass that a camel groaned miserably under the weight of an excessive load. Muhammad was, quote, deeply moved and went to the animal, sympathetically patted its head and told the owner that the dumb animal was complaining about his cruel treatment and that he should treat it with consideration so that he would receive compassion in heaven. And in another place he said, it is a good deed to show compassion to all living beings. Today, only various movements among the Shiites and the Sufis view vegetarianism as the ideal diet. In the Quran can be found statements that prescribe nonviolence as well as such that condone a so-called holy war. Anyone who seeks confirmation for war and violence can find it. Anyone who seeks words for the peaceful living together of people, but also of people, nature, and animals, can likewise find this. In conclusion, let's have a look at Christianity. How does it look here with the commandment, you shall not kill? Christianity bases itself on the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth, who gave people an understanding of God as the loving Father of all his children, who lived the commandment of love for God and neighbor in practice. As old, so-called apocryphal scriptures outside of the Bible confirm, this also included Jesus' love for the animals, which for him meant a meatless diet. But the New Testament also clearly describes the nonviolence of Jesus of Nazareth. And so Jesus says in his Sermon on the Mount, "You have heard that it was said to those of old, 'You shall not kill,' and whoever kills will be liable to judgment. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment." While Jesus of Nazareth expands the fifth commandment, "You shall not kill," to include anger, the priests and theologians did exactly the opposite. They allowed killing and changed the commandment, "You shall not kill," which had been taught for nearly 2,000 years into, "You shall not murder." And now, since 1985, this is what it literally says, for instance, in the German Ecumenical Bible Translation, as well as in numerous English versions. "You shall not murder," which means that according to church doctrine, you may kill people in certain cases. With no word did Jesus call for violence, but always for peaceableness. However, today his teachings are virtually dismissed by the church as utopian, which the so-called representative of God on earth and religious leader of more than 1 billion people, the Pope, bore witness to himself. Pope John Paul II literally said, "We are not pacifists." We see that in Christianity there is practically nothing left of the nonviolent teaching of the pacifist Jesus, and it is precisely those who claim to be the guardians of religion who falsified the original teachings and turned them into their opposite. This also holds true in the relationship between people and animals. Following are several examples that provide evidence that Jesus and his disciples did not have any animals killed and lived on plants and fruit. In the book by Karl Anders Schreiber, How Jesus and the First Christians Lived, there is a quote from the Clementine Homilies, a scripture that was written around the year 220 in Palestine, and it says there, Peter lived on bread and olives, to which he sometimes added vegetables. It was similarly reported about the disciple Matthew. The church author Clemens of Alexandria wrote about him that he, quote, lived on seeds, the fruit of trees, and vegetables without meat. And the religion scholar Schreiber adds, according to the witness of the authors of the 2nd century, the apostles Andreas, Philip, John, and Thomas, as well as the evangelists Mark and Luke, were vegetarians. And this also holds true for James, the brother of Jesus. He was the first leader of the original community in Jerusalem and is referred to in the Bible as one of the pillars of early Christianity. The doctor of the church Hegesippus wrote about James around the year 180 that he lived on seeds and plants and touched neither meat nor wine. However, the lifestyle of the first original Christians in Palestine was a bone of contention for many people, because the temple with its daily animal sacrifices was the religious and political center of society. And for each of the many celebrations during the course of the year, certain slaughters were prescribed. The consumption of certain pieces of meat at the feasts was considered not only an eating habit, but also as obedience to a god who allegedly commanded such things. For this reason, the priests of that time viewed the animal-friendly lifestyle of the followers of Jesus as a defection from their religion. This accusation cost James his life in the year 62 after Christ, when he was stoned to death by adherents of the priests. The fact is that Jesus and the first Christians refused slaughtering and eating of animals out of love for all creatures, and they ate meat only when they were invited and did not want to offend the host who had wanted to give them a treat. But they also carefully explained to the host that the commandment "you shall not kill" also applies to animals. According to the apocryphal Gospel of the Ebionites, Jesus said, "I came to destroy the sacrifices." Like the great Jewish prophets of God before him, he informed the people that the usual regulations regarding sacrifice at that time did not stem from God, but from the priests, who had adopted these from other cultures, for example from Egypt, and then attributed them to God. The doctor of the church Clement of Alexandria literally wrote about this, but I believe sacrifices were invented by men to be a pretext for eating flesh. However, this has nothing to do with Jesus the Christ. He came to abolish all blood sacrifices and blood cults and to end the killing of animals, and at that time he drove the animal merchants out of the Temple of Jerusalem. He came to reestablish the original order of creation, the unity of man, nature, and animals.